Good evening, and welcome to all of you for attending tonight. I'm Mary Laporte. I'm a member of the board of the League of Women Voters of Missoula. I'd like to begin our evening with our land acknowledgement. We call Montana our home and celebrate its grandeur. Most of us, or our families, settled in Montana only decades ago. Yet for a century and millennia, Indigenous people honored this land. They named its rivers and meadows, venerated its mountains, and cherished its abundance. We acknowledge and respect the sovereign tribal nations and peoples who have always lived here. This webinar is a Zoom webinar format, and therefore all microphones will be muted. Please go ahead and type your questions into the Q&A as you think of them. And we will also have a Q&A at the conclusion of the presentations. And we'll ask you again to type in your questions if you have any. We ask you to be respectful of each other. And again, feel free to take this presentation back to your league and other league members. We'll also be talking about any groups or organizations that would like to get involved in this process. I'd like to go ahead and just give a brief overview of the evening. The League of Women Voters is a nonpartisan membership organization for women and men that was founded in 1920. The League promotes political responsibility through informed and active participation in government. This program will cover the basics of redistricting, how redistricting is done in Montana, and how citizens can influence redistricting. Tonight's topics include information on the League of Women Voters itself, recent work at the state and national level, some information about our people-powered Fair Maps campaign. We'll see a slideshow throughout. We'll provide information on our Speakers Bureau and other resources available to you. And finally, again, we'll conclude with a question and answer session. I would like to next introduce Nancy Leifer, President of the League of Women Voters, Montana. Thank you, Nancy.
Thank you, Mary, and welcome everyone. I am delighted to be here this evening and delighted to have all of you here joining us for this basic presentation of Redistricting 101. I know one of the questions that I think probably everyone is wondering is why is redistricting such an important issue? And in fact, I've heard some people say, oh, didn't we finish that already? Well, we did redistricting last year, but that was just for our congressional districts for Montana. This year, we're going to be focusing on redistricting for the state legislature. So in a moment, I'm going to introduce another one of our league members who's going to go through the presentation on just exactly what is redistricting and why it is so important. But I just wanted to begin by saying thank you again for being here and for bringing your attention to this very critical topic. You know, the redistricting that happens in the next year will determine what Montana's legislature, how it will be elected for the next 10 years. And so it's very important that we all be aware of this process, and we have a commission, a redistricting commission here in Montana that is very eager to hear from citizens about our thoughts on how we want to have our legislative districts drawn. So I know we have a very interested and very eager commission to hear from people, and the presentation that you're about to hear will tell you a lot of what you need to know to be able to participate in this process. So without further ado and any more pre-shadowing of what's coming up in the presentation, I would like to introduce League member Rebecca Johnson, who is a member of our People-Powered Fair Maps team for the State League, and she will then make our presentation. Thank you, Rebecca.
Thank you, Nancy. Hello, I'm Rebecca Johnson, and I am a volunteer organizer for the League of Women Voters of Helena in voter services. And I want to thank the League of Women Voters of Missoula for asking for this presentation. and welcome everyone to this presentation. People Powered Fair Maps is a public education campaign of the League of Women Voters to help people in all 50 states understand and engage in the redistricting process in their state. During this presentation, I will cover what the League is and why we are making these presentations, what redistricting is and how it works in Montana, and how people can make their voices heard in Montana's redistricting process. The League of Women Voters was founded in 1920 to help women voters who were new to the process of voting in the United States. The Montana League is a nonpartisan volunteer organization, like all three of us. We do not endorse candidates or political parties. We work to support voter engagement and education for free and fair elections. Having fair districts that reflect the diverse concerns of voters is an essential part of our representative democracy. In June of 2019, the U.S. Supreme Court ruled that the federal courts have no role to play in preventing partisanship in redistricting, shifting the focus for fair redistricting from the federal to the state level. Partisan manipulation of redistricting cuts across partisan lines. Both Democrats and Republicans draw maps that give themselves unfair advantage when they can. This undermines responsiveness to voters. 41 states put redistricting in the hands of currently elected politicians, leaving the process open to partisan manipulation. The League is spearheading efforts for reform to create independent commissions where possible, to demand transparency in the process of redistricting and obtain maps that are fair to the voters. The goal, People Powered Fair Maps, is to help citizens participate in the process to ensure that communities are fairly represented. So what is redistricting all about and why is it important? We elect people to represent us at various levels of government. This League campaign focuses on two levels of representation, nationally in the U.S. House of Representatives and at the state level in our state legislature. As a first step towards fairness, the geographic areas that form the district for these elections should contain the same number of people or as close as possible so that each elected official represents the same number of constituents. Every year, or every 10 years after census data are complete, we have the information we need to redraw the geographic boundaries of congressional and legislative districts to reflect changes in population. At the national level, this is apportionment, allocating the 435 U.S. House of Representatives seats among the 50 states to reflect the changing distribution of population between states. After the 2020 census, Montana was allocated a second U.S. House of Representatives seat. Similarly, population distribution changes within states as well, requiring redrawing the boundaries of state legislative districts to ensure that each represents about the same number of people. The boundaries of the district in which you vote determine who else will also be voting to elect the representative of that district. The boundaries set up now will be the same for the next 10 years. Many things can change over 10 years. A 5-year-old becomes a 15-year-old teenager. Moreover, there is a fundamental principle of democracy at stake. Boundaries should be drawn so that voters can choose their representative, not so that politicians can choose their voters. There is a name for politicians choosing their voters. It is called gerrymandering, named after the Governor Eldridge Gerry of Massachusetts, who back in the early 1800s drew a district to include the voters he wanted. It resembled a salamander, hence the name gerrymander. This diagram shows how it's possible to draw 5 districts of 8 precincts, each in very different ways, given the same 40 precincts. The circles represent precincts with the majority Circle Party voters, and the stars represent precincts with majority Star Party voters. The 2 diagrams in the middle illustrate how each party would draw the lines to maximize their own gain. The drawing left of center is drawn to make each district identical with 6 circles and 2 stars in each. Circles would win all 5 districts. In the drawing to the right of center, there are 5 stars in 2 of the districts, guaranteeing that stars would win 2 districts and circles would win the remaining 3 districts. The drawing on the far right illustrates how competitive districts could be drawn by creating 2 districts that each have the same number of stars and circles, creating districts in which either party could win. Montana is one of the 9 states that has an independent commission. We are among the first in the nation to have an independent commission created by our 1970 Constitution. Montana's commission must comply with Montana's strict transparency laws that provide for the public to see and be part of the process. All commission meetings must be open to the public and broadcast on the Montana Public Affairs Network. Commission decisions must be preceded by opportunity for public comment, and all reports and documents of the commission are published on the commission's website. Montana's Constitution requires the appointment of 5 independent commissioners, none of whom are current elected officials. This slide shows the members of Montana's 2020 commission and who appointed them. 4 of the commissioners are appointed by the leadership of the majority and minority party of the Montana House and Senate. The 5th member and chair of the commission is nonpartisan and is chosen by the other 4 unless they can agree, in which case the 5th commissioner is chosen by the Montana Supreme Court. This year, Montana was awarded a 2nd congressional seat through apportionment. State law gives the commission 90 days from receipt of census data to draw Montana's congressional districts. For the first time since 1980, Montana's commission had to divide the state into 2 districts. This tight time frame required the commission to adopt the final map no later than November 14th. The process for dividing the state into 2 congressional districts involved submission of maps by the public hearings and a final decision by the commission. Here is the map of Montana's 2 new congressional districts. Over 200 maps were submitted by the public. Through a process of map selection and public hearings, the commission adopted the final map, creating 2 congressional districts for Montana that are in effect now through the federal election in 2030. Legislative districts in Montana include 100 House representative districts and 50 Senate districts. Senate districts always encompass a set of 2 housing districts, so there are no additional districts to be drawn for the Senate. The commission will begin work on legislative districts in 2022 and will hold public hearings all around the state. The commission must have its final draft plan finished by the 10th day of the 2023 Montana legislature. The legislature has 30 days to review and make comments on the draft plan. In Montana, the role of the legislature is advisory only. The legislature has no authority to change any decisions made by the commission. Once the commission has received the legislature's comments, it has 30 days to adopt the final map. New legislative districts take effect for the 2024 state legislative election. Here is a map of Montana's legislative districts as they are currently drawn based on the 2010 census data. These districts were close to equal in population as of 2010. With the shift in population to the western part of the state, the new districts will be different. Montana's 2020 population indicates that Montana state legislative representative districts will be based on 10,846 people per district. There are mandatory criteria that the commission must follow in drawing legislative districts. Districts must be equal in population, contiguous, compact, and protect minority representation. The criteria comply with state and federal law and do allow for a little flexibility in making all districts equal in population. The commission also adopted non-mandatory goals they can consider once the mandatory goals are met. These goals include political fairness, political competitiveness, minimizing dividing cities, towns, counties, reservations, and communities of interest, and dealing fairly with those state senators who will have 2 years left in their term when the new districts go into effect in 2024. This is where public comment comes into play. The commission must balance these goals in drawing the final map. Public comment helps the commission to determine how much weight to give each goal. What is a community of interest? A geographical area in which people share common concerns that would be better represented if not divided between districts. Montana's commission wants to know where residents see themselves in communities of interest so that these areas can be taken into account in drawing legislative districts. Political interests such as party affiliation or candidate location should not be in consideration in defining a community of interest. Montana has defined the types of common concerns or interests that qualify as a community of interest to include those listed here on the slide. It is important that a community of interest be defined by those within the community, not outsiders. To give you an example of what might constitute a community of interest, here is an example. The area at the top of the map, excuse me, the area at the top of this map circled by the yellow oval is Bridger Canyon, an area north of Bozeman that is in Gallatin County, but is currently in District 59, colored red on this map, a district composed mostly of Park County and a portion of Sweetgrass County. The dark blue lines on the map are county boundaries. People in Bridger Canyon predominantly work and go to school in Bozeman and use Bozeman as their trade area. If the people of Bridger Canyon share common interests with Bozeman, they could provide public comment to the commission outlining their geographic area and their desire to be in a district in Gallatin County connected to Bozeman. Gallatin County gained enough population in the 2020 census to add 2 additional legislative districts. The overwhelming majority of voters here in Montana and across the country want maps to be fair. They want to elect their representative, not have their representative choose their voters. Here are some of the factors that make a map fair. Up until the 2000 Commission, state legislative districts were drawn in ways that diluted the voting impact of the Native American population. The 2000 and 2010 commissions created more concentrated minority legislative districts, making it possible for Native Americans to elect legislators in about the same percentage as Native Americans are in the state's population. For example, there were 12 Native Americans in the 2021 Montana legislature, about 8% of the total, while Native Americans constitute about 7.5% of the state's population, according to former census data. New census data indicates that Native Americans constitute about 9.3% of the state population, which equals about 14 districts with higher concentration of Native American voters. If one party gets about 60% of the votes for state legislators, then that party should get about 60% of the legislative seats. This outcome does not have partisan bias. It matches the distribution of party votes overall. Political scientists have several mathematical calculations that, when considered together, help identify partisan bias. Analysis of Montana's legislative districts since the 1972 Constitution show very little partisan bias. Data from a range of past elections show that Montana had about 43% of voters who vote Democrat and 55% that vote Republican. This distribution would be similar to the share of seats in the Montana legislature. Fairness to voters is enhanced when individual districts have similar numbers of voters from each party, making the districts politically competitive. Safe districts that always elect a legislator from the same party have a detrimental effect on voters. Safe districts encourage selection of more extreme candidates in the primary, discourage voting in the general election. What's the point? Everyone knows which candidate will win, and provide no incentive for legislators to represent the diversity of their districts. Competitive districts encourage selection of more moderate candidates in the primary, encourage voter turnout. In Montana, legislative districts have been decided on margins of less than 100 votes, and provide no incentive for legislators to represent the diversity of their districts. Competitive districts encourage selection of more moderate candidates in the prime. Oh, sorry, I just have repeated myself. We'll go on to the next. How Montana's commissioners want to hear from citizens. Ultimately, citizen input should be a deciding factor in drawing a line in a specific way. This can only happen if citizens express their comments, concerns, and ideas to the commission. Now is your chance to speak up and let the commission know what is important to you. Redistricting may not be familiar to others. You can help increase awareness by talking with your friends and neighbors. The League also has a speakers bureau that can provide this presentation to organizations and community groups. You can track the next steps in the process on the commission's website. And with today's technology, you can also draw your own map. Which goals of the commission are most important to you in drawing fair maps? The commission must balance these goals as they divide the state into districts. People can submit comments in written form, online, or by mail by following the instructions on the commission's website. People can also provide live testimony at a hearing, either by being present in the hearing room or via Zoom. The schedule for the legislative districting process has not yet been set, but it appears it will be something like this. The commission will finalize their census data sometime in June. then call for maps from the public. Maps can be submitted until sometime in July, after which hearings will be held on the maps submitted in August and September. The commission will select final maps, then have further hearings in November with the final map selected by the end of December. This map will be given to the legislature for 30 days of review in early January. The commission has 30 days after that to finalize and adopt the map. New districts for Montana State Legislature go into effect for the 2024 election. There are free software sites that are manageable for a non-expert person that allows you to draw your own map, including Dave's Redistricting, Representable, District Builder, District R. This is not a typo. This is the name of the program. You can draw a boundary around your geographic community of interest, draw proposed districts for your entire city or county, or you can draw a map with districts that cover the entire state or anything in between. Best practice is to start drawing maps now to get used to the software. However, the commission will be finalizing its census database in June. So maps drawn prior will need to be redrawn once the final data is available. Let's look at an example of drawing maps that was done by a league member to give a Montana example. This slide shows some of the existing House districts in Billings. Because of population growth, Billings will likely gain 2 more legislative districts than it currently has. What would happen if you used one of these mapping programs to create new districts that focus on neighborhoods with higher concentrations of Hispanic residents to reflect more of this cultural group? These neighborhoods are largely located in districts 49, 50, 51, and 52, located in the upper right portion of this map. Here is a drawing of 2 districts drawn in the area that was the old districts 47, 49, 50, and 52. This map was drawn using Dave's Redistricting. The mapping program automatically provides data on the population within the boundaries of each district as it is drawn. In this example, the new District 1, colored red, has nearly 15% Hispanic population, up from the 10.4% that was the highest Hispanic population in the old district. Use of map drawing programs like this enables citizens to draw and submit their own maps to the commission. The League of Women Voters has resources on its website that can help you get started, including links to free mapping sites and recordings of presentations on how to use them. The League site has a link to a video introduction to communities of interest and a worksheet on how to prepare testimony. The site also has a link to the Montana's Commission website. The mission of the League of Women Voters is to help citizens and voters get the information they need to participate in government. Thank you all for your attention today. For those who are interested, the League of Women Voters is a membership organization open to men and women 16 years of age and older. Membership in the League includes 3 levels of League presence and action. At the local level, in Billings, Bozeman, Helena, and Missoula. At the state level, the League of Women Voters of Montana. And at the national level, the League of Women Voters United States. More information about the League can also be found on our website. Be sure to use the link that has my.lwv, which is listed on this slide. You can see that website. During 2022, Montana's commission will divide the state into 100 House districts that will also form the basis for 50 Senate districts. These districts will remain in effect for the next 10 years. The commission wants to hear from Montanans. That's you. Now is the opportunity to be part of this process and ensure that our independent Montana Redistricting Commission divides the state into districts that are fair to all of the people in Montana. Thank you for this opportunity to present this information to you. And we will now take questions.
Thank you very much, Rebecca. That was a very informative slideshow with a lot of information, but we assure you there'll be opportunities to dig in more and understand it. So again, I would like to remind all of our participants to please type in any questions that you have into our Q&A section that you will see on the bottom of your screen. We see one question while we're waiting for others to be entered, and that is, will the slides be available after the webinar? And thank you.
The slides are available. We'd like to be able to provide them as a presentation, as we just did here. So if any organizations or any people from organizations watching this would like to have this presentation made to your organization, we have speakers who can provide this. We are doing it primarily via Zoom right now because it's a technology that's one that we're familiar with, and a lot of people are familiar with it. So we can zoom into a meeting somewhere or share our presentation via Zoom if that works for your organization. If you are a league member, we could probably also provide you with the slides themselves, but the script and the slide go together as a presentation. So I think we'd prefer to do them as a package.
Great. Thank you, Nancy. Well, I thought of a question, and while we wait for any others to come in, and that is on the Montana non-mandatory goals. I found that very interesting. When were those goals developed, and how can public comment influence those goals, as Rebecca indicated?
Those goals were developed early on last year when the commission first started meeting, and they were defining what they were going to be doing in terms of the part of this whole process that they have some control over. I was there and watched part of that process, and a lot of what is here now in those chosen goals are also goals that had been parts of the commission goals in years previously. So for example, the 2010 and the 2000 commissions had very similar goals to the ones that we see for that the commission adopted this year as well. And as far as how citizens can influence that, the mandatory criteria are ones that the commission has to meet. So those are there, and they're going to be dealt with first. But there is a lot of flexibility in and around meeting those goals that can take into account other concerns. And the question is, which of those various different goals are going to be the ones that the commission feels are most important to try to accommodate as they're trying to draw all these lines. And one thing that will help them understand which of these other various goals are more important than others is what citizens have to say about what they think are the most important goals. So that's where comment on people commenting on their sense of what's important about those goals, I think would be very helpful for the commission. There was also a comment on the chat that I wanted to just echo, which is that our website actually has on a number of good resources and a lot more information about all of this. That's the website for the State League. The address for it, again, was on a previous slide, but if you Google League of Women Voters of Montana, and again, look for the one that has the MY in it, MY, that'll take you to the homepage of our website. And on the left-hand side, there's a whole list of menu items, and about the bottom 4 or 5 are all pages you can click on that have information about redistricting in Montana.
Okay. And then someone asked about whether there will be any small group gatherings to work on creating maps.
You know, that's a good question. And what we're doing in that regard is we're encouraging league members to go out and work with their communities of interest, so that these groups that form are groups of people who share a geographic sense of community based on one of those criteria that were listed on the slide that talked about what defines a community of interest. That example that we gave, for example, of Bridger Canyon, if the folks in Bridger Canyon feel like they would like to be able to be in Gallatin County as opposed to being in one that's in Park County, the folks in that area of Bridger Canyon can come together and work with each other to be able to create a map and take it forward. So that's the ideal way, is that communities of people would identify themselves, work together with each other, and then propose the map.
Okay, thank you. The next question that I see is, what are the typical blocks that the legislative districts are made out of? Are they precincts? Are they down to the census block level? Are districts typically within county lines?
You know, there's one of the goals is to try to follow existing political lines. So trying not to divide over county lines, trying not to divide over other political lines like cities and towns. But ultimately, they're going to be trying to draw these maps coming down to smaller blocks than that. And it may be at the level of census blocks. It may be at the level of census tracts. One of the difficulties that the commission is running into this year is that the census has had to interject a certain percentage of data into those units of the census that are too small in terms of having too few people in them to be able to mask the identities of the data coming from that area. And it wasn't this much of a problem 10 years ago, but as we all know, what's happened in the last 10 years is that the internet has made it possible to get all kinds of databases with all kinds of information. And so the ability to be able to mask identities in census data now requires a lot more noise information being inserted than it would have 10 years ago, because people are a lot more adept and there's a lot more information out there to cross-check and try to figure out who people are. So the census has interjected quite a bit of noise, especially in Montana, where we have so many districts that are so small, so many census blocks and whatnot. So it's going to be kind of hard for the commission to figure out exactly how to do this, because the data that they'll be looking at will admittedly not be accurate. So I'm not sure exactly how that's going to translate into how they're going to draw those lines, but just know that you may very well see data about the place you live and you're going to look at it and you're going to say, wait a minute, this is kind of off. And it may very well be a little bit off. So that's what they've had to do. We all have to struggle and suffer because of all of this explosion of information that's out there, and we need to be careful not to allow for the census to identify individual people. Longer answer than you wanted, but it's a complex question.
I have a question for you, Nancy, which I think the audience would find fascinating, because you were involved so much with, I know our group talks a lot about the redistricting for the congressional seats, but I'd love to know your insight from being so involved in the process for the congressional seats, that, kind of what your sense was of how it runs and, where people could make the most difference. I'd love to hear your thoughts on that.
Sure. Well, the final decisions on the congressional data, in my mind, came down to credible data about past voting records. I think the final criteria that really was the cutting edge one way or the other was how politically competitive are the districts. And I think there is a commitment on the part of the commission to try to make these districts competitive as much as they can. And I think in the case of the congressional district, it really came down to what data do we have to indicate political competitiveness? I know the League had been providing some data from a website that is based in, I believe, in California, and the name of it escapes me right now, but it's one of these mathematical, take a bunch of data and you run it through a bunch of different statistical analyses, and you come up with something that tells you something because of the statistical analyses. It tends to be kind of like a black box, you know, where the people who build all the analysis understand exactly how it works, but there's maybe only 4 or 5 people who would know that. And the rest of us, we don't see that. We just see the numbers going in on one side and the final results coming out of the other. And so it's harder to have much faith in something like that, where you can't really understand how they came to the conclusion they did. Whereas the data that they had based on actual election results in the last, I think it was 3 or 4 elections for the representative for Montana, which is very relevant to drawing boundaries for the future elections to elect representatives from Montana to the US Congress. That data had I think a lot of credibility, particularly among some of the commissioners. And so I think our big challenge going forward is going to be to decide, to try to talk through what database on political competitiveness is one that we all can agree makes sense. And then can we actually trace from the data to the conclusion how we get there, so that we can all say, oh, I see. Yeah, that's how that measured political competitiveness.
Another question came in, and that is, will we see how many people from each party are in a district?
You know, when you are mapping, using these mapping tools, they have built into them an analysis of the past, probably from 2014 on, elections. And so they do have data that will indicate from their database in that particular area that you're mapping, how many would be voting Republican and how many would be voting Democrat. That is data that is available in these mapware programs that we had in that previous slide. That data is, each one of these different mapping programs has their own little black box of figuring out how they come up with that data. So it's there for what it's worth, you know. But yes, they do have data that indicate what the different balance would be politically in the area that you're mapping. As you're mapping it, you can see that. Yeah. Great.
Again, and then that question was, as you play around or try different maps.
Yes. Yep, they all, I think they all have this little scorecard up in the corner that keeps an ongoing track of what you've got outlined and what the statistics are. Minority populations, Republicans, Democrats, those kinds of key criteria are all there, sort of adding up on the side so that you can check to see what you're doing. That's how, for example, the League member who drew that sample district in Billings, that program was able to tell, as she was drawing it, what was happening with the population of Hispanics in the area she was drawing. And so that's how she was able to kind of come up with that shape that had almost 15% Hispanic population.
I imagine when you get into it, it must be kind of fun. It must be a very interesting process.
You know, it is. And to say that you don't need to have any particular skills to do it is probably not quite accurate. What you do need to have is a sense of intrigue and interest and some basic skill in computer work, so that you can find how these work to be fascinating and fun, as opposed to finding how these programs work to being frustrating and awful. I mean, you know, it depends on your level of capacity, but you do not need to be a mapping expert. You do not need to be, you know, it's not an expert thing. As long as you can master some basic computer skills, you can draw these maps. And yes, that's fascinating to get into various different lines and drawings. And let me just add too, that the commission isn't expecting you to draw 100 districts for the whole state. you can draw districts just in your city, just in your town, just in your area, and submit those. And you don't need to worry about having to come up with the whole entire region or the whole entire state. Whatever area makes sense, and perhaps a couple on either side, that would be fine.
Great.
And I found it interesting for congressional seats where you could go and look at all the submitted maps and then start, which were your favorite maps and why, as public comments. And so it really educated people. For me, I have no knowledge. I just found it fascinating to look at all the different maps and then the top ones they chose, and then all the different comments from fellow Montanans and why they liked a particular map. And so I felt that was very user-friendly and easy for you to provide a public comment.
That's a very good comment, Rebecca. I forget about that part because it's in the past, but it will be in the future again. Yeah, all you have to do to comment is just put your cursor over the part of a map that you want to comment on, and a little box opens up right there on the website of the commission, and you can just type your comment right there on the commission's website in this very location, and then it stores that and makes it available so everyone else can see what you've commented. Yes, it's extremely easy to put in public comment on the maps once they're up there. So just a little comment about that. If you are interested in trying to draw some maps, I highly recommend that you go in and play around with those programs, watch a couple of the videos that we have on our website to see which one appeals to you. Play around with it now, because the time period for submitting maps to the commission is going to be fairly concentrated and fairly limited. One of the details I didn't get into in the presentation that would cloud the picture too much, but one of the details is that our commission is doing a very good job, as best it can, to address the issue of prison gerrymandering. Prison gerrymandering is a situation where people who are in prison end up being counted in the county where they're located in the prison, but it's more fair to them overall if they were counted in the community where they lived before they went to prison, because it's unfair to get a lot of political representation for a particular area where the population there is not that large outside of the prison. It's the prison is what makes it bigger because of all the people there. So there's been a push across the entire nation to try to have commissions get the information they need to be able to reassign those individuals who are in prison back to the community of where they were before they went to prison, and have them be counted there instead of in the county where the prison is. And so our commission is in the process of working with a contractor to actually go in and change and reallocate the data that underlies the maps that they'll be using to draw the maps for these different districts, to try to get that done by sometime in June. And hopefully, if that can be done by sometime in June, at that point, the commission will then turn around and say to the people of Montana, okay, here's the data that we would like you to use. Now, please draw maps. And then people will have probably about 6 weeks to draw their maps after that. So that's to wait until then to draw some. I think the more practice you have between now and then, it'll make that 6 weeks go much easier if you get some practice in beforehand. And don't just wait till then to try to figure out how to use these mapping programs.
One more question came in here. Does the commission take into account students living on university campuses?
The commission will be using the census data. And as far as students are concerned, wherever the student attributed themselves to living when the census came around, that's the data that the commission will be using. That's an area that the commission has no control over. In fact, the commission really has no control over any of the rest of the data. The only data that they're going to be modifying is this prison gerrymandering issue.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Well, I don't see any more questions. I would like to once again thank you all for attending this program tonight. Special thanks to Rebecca for your presentation and to the League of Women Voters of Montana. And we also want to acknowledge that the League of Women Voters at the national level has provided grant funding for work on redistricting at all the league levels. Again, I'm going to go over a little bit about the timeline, so you have it. Montana's legislative redistricting process will determine how we elect the Montana legislature for the next 10 years, beginning in 2024. This is the time to speak up and let the commission know your concerns. Montana's Redistricting Commission will be finalizing the census data for Montana sometime in June. Then the commission will put out a call for citizens to submit their own maps. The commission will set a deadline for these maps sometime in July, after which there will be hearings on the maps that were submitted in August and September, and hearings on the final maps will take place sometime in November and December. Again, citizens can submit maps, make comments on existing maps, or describe areas of concern. The website for the commission has the current information, including maps that have been submitted. The League of Women Voters encourages you to work with your community to let the commission know how legislative districts will affect you. For more information or to request a presentation on this redistricting one-on-one for your organization or group, please go to the website of the League of Women Voters of Montana. And again, we encourage any of you to join the league at your local level if you want to be part of the information that the league provides on a regular basis, or just become involved in your own community. I want to thank you again, and this concludes our webinar for this evening.